Miss Katie, thank you so much for being here with me today. I am so excited about this conversation.
Me too. You're one of my favorite people to talk to, and I can't wait.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's fun. So I was actually on your podcast earlier this week, and you're on mine this week, which this is the first ever, just back to back like this. So I'm super excited. And for everyone listening, you and I met, just maybe 6 weeks ago at JJ Virgin's Women's Mastermind?
Yeah, really recently. And I think totally connected right from the beginning. I loved your approach to finances and life and everything. And felt like there were some similarities in our stories, and it was so awesome to connect.
It really was. And so you spoke at the event, and of course, I've heard someone would have to be under a box right now to not know your name or have stumbled across your work or come across if they're if they're Google searching for some natural remedies, you're always right up there at the top. So whether people listening or not know that they know you, they actually probably have come across your work. So anyway, I was already excited to meet you and to hear what you had to say at your presentation, but then your presentation just blew me over because in my opinion, it was just so right on and was very different than most of what people are saying out there. So I can't wait to dig in. There's so many different directions we can go on today's call. And one of those, I thought where we would start is you're Katie, and you're known as Wellness Mama, wellnessmama.com. And how I stumbled across you was most of my listeners know that I had a big health crisis back a few years ago. And it was a kind of a perfect storm of many different things. But one of the things was just toxic overload, that I'd had my amalgams taken out. I got very severely ill from heavy metal poisoning, mercury, but other metals as well. And didn't realize at the time that my entire life was basically toxic. It was chemicals everywhere. And I think most of us we're not even aware of how many chemicals are in our environment, in our households, in the products, in our foods, so on and so forth. I know I had no idea, but I had to go into really serious life-saving modality and had to take all the chemicals out of my life. And again, until I started doing that, I had no idea how pervasive and prevalent they are just in almost everywhere. So that's where I stumbled across your work at first, is because I was trying to look at what are things I could make at home, or what are products that are safe. And that's part of your work, is that on your website and through your blogs and your podcast, you really bring to light so many of the options that are available in easy homemade recipes. And I'm not a person in the kitchen, so your stuff is so great. So I'm thinking, I actually can do that recipe. I can make that at the home. It's so simple. I actually have time. So would you talk a little bit to that? What I'd love to start before you actually answer that question is, what inspired you to get started on this mission? I'm guessing it was just a kind of a side project and it's turned into really your life and your business. But what was the inspiration behind this? Was there a moment, or was there just kind of a calling?
There was a moment, and it was totally unexpected. This wasn't my technical plan for my life. I was the one that finished high school really early, finished college really early, and was supposed to be on track for potentially a legal career or maybe political career. That was kind of always what I thought the plan for my life would be, until finishing college and realizing I didn't actually want to do that. And so instead, I ended up meeting my husband, walking across the country. We got married, and when we had our first child, that was kind of the impetus for all of my health problems that hit. So it was essentially a pregnancy or postpartum induced Hashimoto's, but it took me a lot of years to finally get that diagnosis. But ironically, the reason I started writing about it was that at my follow-up appointment after having my son, I read in Time magazine that was in the doctor's office. I was waiting for a long time. And an article I was flipping through, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. The line in the article was that for the first time in 2 centuries, the current generation of American children will have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. And I was holding the next generation, this tiny, perfect newborn, and of course was a hormonal mess, being 6 weeks postpartum. And it was just kind of like, heck no, this is not happening. We have to change this. And I had no idea how I would ever be able to help change that. But I knew I was going to have to try, and that I wanted to figure out, first of all, why is this happening and what can we do about it? Because I've never been one to just accept anything at face value. My parents can attest to that. I was a little bit of a hellion of a child because I always asked why. But that was in that moment, I was like, why are we seeing this? This is not normal. When we see a dramatic shift in longevity and life expectancy within one generation, something is going on. And so my original degree was in journalism. And so that was my default. I went into research phase, which was a great timing because I was stuck at home with a baby who was nursing like 24 hours a day. I couldn't go anywhere anyway. And just really started researching why we were seeing these changes. And at the same time, I was researching my own health and why do I not feel good after having a baby? Why am I tired all the time? Why is my hair falling out? And finally realizing I thought that I had some kind of thyroid issue, and it ended up taking me years and 7 doctors to finally get an actual diagnosis and be able to work toward a change. But in that process, I was just chronicling my research on Wellness Mama because I realized if I'm having these problems, other people are too. And if our children are facing this gigantic uphill battle, I think moms are the ones who can fix it. Not only because do we care so much because they're our children, but we also make the buying decisions in our country. And we're feeding the next generation and we're raising the next generation. And we're so influential in so many aspects of society. And so my hope from the beginning was really to just empower women and to let them understand the power they already have to affect a change, and then to give really powerful, easy solutions to help them actually do that. Because I have no doubt that we still have the ability to change the outcome. And that quote about never doubt that a small group of men can change the world for a need that all has ever been, I think that even applies more so to moms. And the running joke that a concerned mom can do better research than the FBI is absolutely true. So I've seen firsthand what happens when you give moms the right tools or give women the right tools and how much they can create change. And I only am a small part of this movement, but it's been amazing to see those little ripples that all of us started 10 plus years ago now becoming these big tidal waves that are changing so many aspects of society, and all the healthy foods that are available now in stores that weren't. And now, I started making everything back when I first started: laundry detergent, makeup, all of it, because you couldn't buy it. And now there actually are even amazing options you can buy. We're seeing the changes happening. And so that's really hopeful and encouraging. But that's also the reason I got into this, was just realizing what my kids would face one day if we didn't start making changes.
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it? That with all the technology, and we're actually living longer than we've ever lived, obviously. But if that's a true statistic, what did you find? Why would our children have a lower life expectancy?
So the statistics in the article, they were talking about, mainly they were seeing the trends in things like heart disease and cancer and autoimmunity, diabetes. And we know that just based on the current trajectory, you hear those statistics in the news all the time, by 2020 or 2030, 1 in 2 women will have this, or 1 in 2 men will be diagnosed with this type of disease. Just seeing the rise in chronic illness. And I think it's essentially sort of a perfect storm, and probably ties in with your story as well, which is that our medical system is amazing in many ways. And if you're going to ever be in a car accident or have any kind of trauma, you want to be in the US. They're second to none when it comes to trauma care or really dangerous infectious disease. They get those models, they're amazing at it. But the chronic disease model is somewhat new. We didn't have this rise of chronic disease years ago. And so the medical community, from my research, is still adapting to that somewhat. So they're still trying to take a little bit more of a symptoms-based approach, or kill it with antibiotics, or treat it like a trauma approach to something that has a longer history that caused it, and that also needs a slower and more holistic approach to removing. And I know you found that when you had to sort of really take your health into your own hands and recover. And I feel like while it's getting there rapidly, thank goodness, I think the current medical model isn't still totally adapted to the chronic disease model yet. And so until they do, we're seeing these autoimmune disease rates skyrocket and diabetes skyrocket. And I think it's just something that is going to be the big problem of our time that we really have to conquer.
And what is your theory or your research show as far as what is the cause of the chronic disease?
That's the interesting part. So in the infectious disease model, it's like one bacteria or virus causes one disease. It's a very one-to-one, easy to understand thing. When you're talking about chronic disease, there's so many theories, but a lot of them go back to things like inflammation or low-level cellular damage, or the body not being able to function at the right cellular level based on negative inputs that it's constantly exposed to. And that's what we've seen drastically change in the span of just a couple generations. So our grandparents, they just ate food. They called it food, but it was organic food. And they didn't have the constant chemical exposure. There wasn't the same amount of plastics. They didn't have the same heavy metal exposure. So their bodies just didn't have to deal with the same number of negative inputs. So what that means for us in today's world is we just have to be a little more proactive, because we have more negative inputs, we need to be more proactive about putting positive inputs into our life as well to balance those out. We don't really have the luxury of just being able to like quote unquote everything in moderation and just live with the status quo and maintain that, unfortunately, until we fix some of these problems. We just have so many things that our body is bombarded with all the time. We just need to be a little more conscious in supporting the body. So the factors could be things like endocrine disrupting chemicals in plastics, or pesticides in our food, or there's hundreds and hundreds of chemicals in most personal care products. And we don't think about those necessarily. Like, I feel like most people get when you eat a food, it impacts your body. We understand that. But when we eat something, it gets buffered through our digestive system and through our liver. So we have a little bit more of a protection mechanism there, and it's kind of dealt with before it gets into our blood. When we inhale something through breathing a chemical, or we put it on our skin, it's kind of a fast track right to our brain or right to our blood. And so all of these chemicals that we're exposed to, they're invisible, they're scentless. A lot of them, they just go straight into our body. Some of them can cross the blood-brain barrier and get straight into our brain. And previous generations didn't have to deal with this. So this is something we're now having to learn and adapt to. And the analogy I've always used is that our bodies, in a sense, if you want to very simplify it, we can think of them as like a bathtub. And if you have a big bathtub, you can put kind of anything in it. Ideally, you put water if you're taking a bath. But in theory, you could put sand or frogs or plants. You can put whatever you want in the bathtub. But once it reaches the top, no matter what you put in it, it's going to overflow. And so in today's world, we just have so many things we're constantly throwing in that bathtub that we're seeing them overflow much earlier in life, in our children, in even young adults, seeing these health problems that were once called like problems for the elderly only. And when that bathtub overflows, the analogy being that's when you're seeing cellular damage, or you're seeing chronic disease, or you're seeing cancer or heart disease. And it's not that one simple thing caused the problem. So it's not like one particular endocrine disruptor created this problem. It's not a one-to-one ratio, but we have to be cognizant of the entire input of factors that's causing this rise in inflammation and rise in problems.
And so would you say that maybe there's a handful of things that if people were more aware of, that they had more control over? There is just a lack of awareness. I mean, I think most people know that sugar is pervasive. It's in every product, every packaged food product. It's named different names so that we don't even know, or we don't even know our children are consuming so much sugar. So that's one that's being talked about, especially with some of the documentaries and things coming out. But what else? Like, what do you see as maybe these that might have a big impact that most people aren't aware of as sort of these negative inputs?
I think in food, the three that are easiest to focus on are, like you said, sugar, which the body doesn't have a biological need ever for refined sugar. You can eat carbs, you can eat fruit, you can eat sweet potatoes. There's great natural sources, but we don't have a need for refined sugar. Same with polyunsaturated hydrogenated vegetable oils. So things like margarine and vegetable oil, the body doesn't recognize those, and they're chemically created fats. So that's one. There's a good deal of data now, and I always try to avoid that. And then pesticide contamination in food. So I find with food, it's easier to think in the positive than the negative. So instead of thinking what you shouldn't eat, just think of trying to eat foods that originally grew or walked or flew or swam, things that are actually whole food sources. And in general, just things without an ingredient list whenever possible. And I feel like there's so many great voices spreading the word about that. The ones that I think kind of slip under the radar a lot of times are the household and personal care things we're exposed to. So as a general guideline there are thousands of chemicals that they've never been really tested for safety, but they're approved for use in cosmetics or home products or laundry products. And we're constantly exposed to those all day long through what we breathe and through what we touch. So as an example, that smell that you smell when you walk down the aisle at the grocery store with the laundry aisle, those are chemicals that are specially designed to smell good and smell good for a long time. So they're designed to stick to fabric and stay there as long as possible. And that fabric is sitting on your skin, so you're getting skin exposure, and you're also breathing it, so you're getting lung exposure. And it's constant low-level exposure because most people wear clothes at least all day while they're awake. And those are some sources of really harmful chemicals that most people never even think of. about. Even just the word fragrance on a label of a household product or a personal care product, that can include up to 300 chemicals, many of which are not tested for safety, some of which can be endocrine disruptors or actually have links to cancer that they're just now finding. So the same thing applies as it does with food, just to household products and personal care. Try as few ingredients as possible, as close to whole natural ingredients as possible. And thankfully, like we talked about it before, there's so many good options you can actually buy now. You don't have to make them from scratch like you used to have to do. But just being cognizant of that and kind of thinking of any factors that we can stop throwing in our bathtub just to keep that inflammation down.
Yeah, and I love the bathtub analogy. And I Airbnb my house. Actually, I have a couple Airbnbs because I like different revenue streams. We've talked about that before. But so it's interesting because since I really have a clean house and my products are clean, my house is, even the selections, my wood floors are organic wood that don't have any type of stains. My walls are made out of natural clay. Everything I can do, even when I built my house, was looking for natural construction products, for example. No carpet and, just these different things that have off gases. My mattress is organic. So, so I'm used to this now and I have to for my own health concerns. But when I have Airbnb guests, they come and they buy their own groceries and they bring their own products. And so I Airbnb'd my house this last week, for example, and I came back to, first, there's orange juice that's in the refrigerator. There's Bluebell ice cream in the freezer. But some of the other products were off as far as bug spray because I'm here in Austin, Texas, which we have a lot of mosquitoes. There was Tide detergent that was for the laundry. There was, whatever name brand deodorant that was left. I'm trying to think what else, just normal like Suave shampoo, even though that this is kind of a luxury type Airbnb. It was a Suave type shampoo that was left. And like Crest toothpaste. So I was just laughing because I don't see these products very often because I buy different products or make them myself. But do you have anything to say to that? To me, it's just this kind of, I live in my own bubble now and everyone that I talk to is pretty savvy or a little bit more savvy with this. But then it reminds me just kind of the normal person out there that thinks they're being healthy. I don't think they realize that they're exposed to some of these things through these products you buy at the normal grocery store.
Yeah, unfortunately, the good news is I do think that we're seeing a rise in the understanding of this, and definitely across the board, a more natural lifestyle tends to be definitely becoming more popular. And we're seeing that in just traffic to articles on these different topics. And that's always been a focus for me for education because I think it's an important balance. I don't want to create a world where everyone's afraid of all of these products and we're just constantly terrified of all the things we're interacting with because stress is equally harmful. That's not the goal. But the goal is just that as I'm able to educate people, there are easy switches, especially in today's world. You can switch out for a natural laundry detergent that you could still buy at the store, and natural toothpaste you can still buy at the store. And now they don't even really cost any more than the conventional ones. You just have to be cognizant of that. So I think it's people like me and you and so many other voices that are educating about this. And we're seeing that even on major corporate levels now. We know that major companies are acquiring and creating lines of natural products because they know that's where the trends are going as well. And so I think we're starting to see the tide shift a little bit. And to me, that's encouraging. I know that the tendency, a lot of people get mad when a small company gets bought by a big company, and they just assume that the product is going to change. Thankfully, there are examples now of companies who have maintained their integrity even when they've been acquired by larger companies. And the cool part there is that, yes, all of us are making changes, hopefully, on our own level day to day in our own lives. But when a company like Procter & Gamble then starts buying all organic in one sector, that changes the entire marketplace overnight. And it changes what people are growing and what's being created. And so we need both. We need all of us taking ownership and making changes in our own life, but also, thankfully, now that we're finding it, like this message is reaching more people, we're even seeing big companies kind of coming on board with this. So it gives me hope that in the next 10 years, we're going to see a drastically different world when it comes to these products. But I agree, we're still kind of in that tension point where a lot of people don't realize it because unlike food, if you eat a food that makes you sick, you notice that immediately. You can see that input-output reaction. Whereas when you have chronic low-level exposure to something like laundry detergent, you're not having an immediate reaction. So it's much harder to sometimes realize just how big of an impact those things have on the body.
And so where do you see, and then that's what I love about your website, everybody listening, for example, to go on and, for example, bug spray that you wouldn't even think of off, or suntan lotion or sunscreen maybe. And what you do is you say you give these healthy alternatives and or homemade recipes to be able to replace, but it's just really bringing to the attention that the off brand might be some very dangerous chemicals, but they're actually natural ways, some essential oils and some really easy things you can make at home that can replace these things. And to your point, it's actually very simple. Once we know this, it's not like we have to add one more thing to the list of things to do. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just that small mental shift. And then it becomes so easy to implement these things once you just have it on your radar. It's not a gigantic paradigm shift. You don't have to like never eat foods you love again or never use products that actually work on your hair or your skin. It's just making that mental shift and then slowly implementing that across different aspects of your life.
And so I'd like to ask just a few of these. So when, like, for example, nail care, I see, of course, I mean, my nails are, I can't put nail polish on because, again, that just anything chemical, I try to refrain from putting anything on my body the best that I can. I mean, we live in the world we live in, so you can't be ridiculous about this. But what do you have to say about like fingernail polish?
This is another one. So there are a few good natural options now. I actually have a blog post on this. If anybody wants to Google just wellness mama nail polish, it should come up. But it's another area we don't really think about. I mean, our nails are kind of a hard substance. We don't think people that what we put on them can get into our body, but it absolutely can. There have been some really enlightening studies that they've done on what happens even within the first few minutes or 30 minutes after putting nail polish on your nails and the chemicals that can enter your bloodstream from that. And like you said, it's not to be alarmist. It's not that you should never paint your nails again. But considering this as a part of a beauty routine for a lot of people, just making that switch and choosing safer options or just choosing to let your nails be natural when you can and just put a little of a safe oil like argan oil or olive oil on them like they do. I've seen this in Europe. They just nourish their nails versus cover their nails, making those little shifts and just relying on our natural beauty sometimes versus always having to cover it up.
I love that. Exactly. And what about deodorant?
That's a super easy one. So it's something I've been making for, gosh, probably 12 years now. And there are tons of DIY versions if you're up for it, but there's also now a lot of natural versions that you can buy in the store. The big things are somewhat controversial, but things like aluminum, which are more in antiperspirants than even deodorants. But they're finding that, for instance, with breast cancer, over 50% of breast cancer occurs in the upper outer quadrant of the breast, which is on either side, the one closest to the armpit, which is why you might have seen some of the more controversial articles about is there a link between antiperspirants and cancer? And there isn't enough data to definitively say that obviously antiperspirants cause cancer, or they would have pulled them by now. But when there's a correlation like that, to me as a journalist in background and a data nerd, that's at least worth considering. And if it's something that you can easily make a natural switch for, to me, that's the benefits of that switch far outweigh the risk, especially if you have another product that works. So I always encourage people just either make your own, which is one of the simplest natural products to make. It's only 3 ingredients if you want to keep it simple, or just buy a natural version that doesn't have aluminum, that doesn't have propylene glycol, that doesn't have parabens or any of the other big offenders or fragrances. And that'll get out most of the harmful components. And just realizing that your armpits are a source of lymph flow. So you have like a lot of lymph nodes in your armpit and along with your neck. So if you ever get sick, sometimes people will have a bump in their armpit when their lymph node is swollen while they're ill. And so we have to think about the fact that we're putting chemicals right on top of our lymphatic system every single day. So it's another chronic low level exposure if you happen to have any of these problematic things in your deodorant. And it's also just a super easy switch to make. And one tip I give as well, people can Google Wellness Mama armpit detox. And I have a whole post that explains how you can use a combination of natural products to detox your armpits from all those years of low level exposure, and also to reduce over time body odor and the need to wear deodorant. Because again, if you support the body in the right way, eventually you might find you don't sweat as much when you're not trying to, and also that you don't stink when you sweat, so you don't need deodorant as much.
Exactly. What about toothpaste or teeth whiteners?
So I'm super excited about this one. So just on a high level, we have to think about the fact when we brush our teeth, our mouth is highly vascular and highly innervated. We have lots of blood vessels in the mouth, and what we put in our mouth enters our bloodstream very quickly. That's why some medications actually can be used just under the tongue. because it enters the body so quickly. So again, you just want to consider what you're putting in your mouth that many times, that chronic low level exposure. And this was one of the toughest ones for me when I first started the switch, because back then there were not natural options at all. And with thyroid disease, personally for me, fluoride is really problematic because it binds to the same receptors as iodine and some other things and thyroid hormone. So when I am exposed to fluoride, it can really interfere with my thyroid function. So it's something I had to be careful of. And so I started researching and realized there's not going to be a good option I could buy at that point. So I developed a homemade version, which at that point was pretty radical, the idea of making your own toothpaste. And at the same time, I actually had a cavity, a small cavity that my dentist knew about and was watching it, and I didn't want to get it filled. I think I might have actually been pregnant at the time, so I really didn't want to get it filled while I was pregnant. And so I made this toothpaste that was all natural ingredients, including the minerals that teeth actually need to stay healthy, like calcium and magnesium and phosphorus, along with healthy oils and things that supported the probiotic balance in the mouth. And the cavity got better. So there's a process called remineralization that natural dentists are aware of. Basically, the body can just put minerals back on the outside of where a cavity was, and it can re-harden. So it may not go back totally to the same shape, but it's no longer an active cavity. And so that it doesn't need to be filled. And people can Google wellness on remineralization. There's a post about it, as well as a podcast with a dentist explaining it. But I made this toothpaste and my cavity got better. And since that day, we've been using this toothpaste now for over a decade, and none of my kids have ever gotten a cavity. My husband and I have not ever gotten a cavity since then. So I feel like it just illustrates in life, if we support the body's natural process rather than fight it, our bodies are designed to move toward healing. We wouldn't have made it this far, and our population would not have survived this many years if we weren't designed to be able to move toward optimal health. We just have to kind of remove the roadblocks and let our body do what it does.
Sunscreen.
So this is a controversial one, and I should probably, because it'll be a little controversial, I'll caveat by saying, obviously talk to your doctor or a trained medical professional before you make any medical decisions. I'm personally not a fan of sunscreen in general, just because we have a chronic vitamin D deficiency in our country. And vitamin D deficiency puts you at a 40% higher risk of all cancers. And so certainly skin cancer is a thing and it happens, but percentage-wise, it's not a cancer that happens as often as, for instance, breast cancer or colon cancer or other types of cancer. So not to say it can't be deadly, because certainly it can. But again, going back to the data, we look at many cases of melanoma, for instance, happen in places where the sun doesn't shine, so to speak. There's definitely some interesting information right now calling into question the idea that back to that whole one-on-one input-output thing, that the sun exposure directly causes cancer. And what they're finding is actually it may be things like all of these inputs that are causing cellular mutations. So then when the sun hits our skin or we get a sunburn, that mutation then turns into a cancerous tissue, versus normal sun exposure without that wouldn't cause necessarily skin cancer. And there's still a lot of ongoing research here. But what we do know, and there's been a lot of publicity about recently, is that many sunscreens can be really problematic. So Hawaii just banned oxybenzone and some other chemicals in sunscreen because we know that it coats coral reefs and is affecting our ocean really drastically. But they're also finding that these can impact the body in the same way, and that they can have harmful effects on the body. So if you're going to use sunscreen, my advice, again, check with a professional, but is to use a natural version that's a mineral sunscreen that has non-nano mineral particles. So basically, it's creating a physical barrier on the skin to protect from sun damage, versus a chemical barrier like many of the aerosol sprays or the ones with oxybenzone. But what I do, and my default, is to actually get a healthy amount of sun exposure every day. So you only need a few minutes, 15 to 20 to 30 minutes, depending on your skin type. And then when you've gotten enough sun, just cover up with a hat or a shirt or go in the shade, versus constantly just exposing yourself to chemicals. It goes back to those little baby steps of just avoiding the chronic low level exposure. But I'd love to see a shift in the overall conversation about the sun being bad, because I think we've vilified something that's drastically important for health. Based on a little bit of data. And then now the data coming out is showing there's a whole lot of factors that go into something like skin cancer. And we don't want to deplete vitamin D levels for an entire population to avoid one type of cancer when vitamin D deficiency is linked to all the other types of cancer. So wow. I think it's part of a bigger discussion.
And what about household products like detergents and dishwashing detergent and glass cleaner and countertop cleaner and toilet cleaner and you name it?
Yeah, so there's so many options on this. People can Google any of those and add the word wellness on it, and there's DIY recipes that come up. But there's now also products like the one I use is called Branch Basics, and it's a concentrate. So it's a low waste formula. You get a bottle, and you can then make laundry detergent, all-purpose cleaner, glass cleaner, everything from this one thing. So you're reducing waste, you're reducing plastic exposure, and it's completely safe and inert. In fact, products like this, they just tested, and it's tested the same as water for the skin as far as safety for the skin. So it can be used even on babies or very sensitive skin. And so then there is no low level exposure in your laundry or in your personal care products or in your cleaners. You can just still accomplish the same thing, but without any of the problems.
And I love that too. I do something similar, but I get a big refillable bottle and you can put it in all the sprays. So I just have a few spray bottles around the house, but then I'm just filling the same spray bottle, which to your point too, reduces so much waste because every time we buy another spray bottle, that's more plastic that goes hopefully in the recycle bin. But it's just crazy the amount of, I'm still overwhelmed. I try to reduce plastic as much as possible, but my recycle bin just continues to fill with plastic. And just that alone, I'm thinking, golly, I mean, imagine those that aren't paying attention to how much plastic. And so do you have any research about how damaging plastic can be? I mean, we can see things, what it's doing to our oceans, and it's overfilling our landfills. But what about plastic?
Absolutely. So this is a definite soapbox for me. And there are experts like Dr. Alan Christensen that are really spreading the word about this and how when you look at the statistics again, we can't explain with just nutrition or any of the explanations they try to use on why we're seeing such a rise in obesity and heart disease and cancer and diabetes, because nothing in our nutrition has changed that much in the past few decades to explain that. But what we do know are things like that they're now finding plastic residue under 30 feet of ice in Antarctica, which means we have fully saturated the planet with plastic at this point. And we now understand that many types of plastic are endocrine disruptors. So again, it's with the low level exposure, but over time that keeps the body's natural hormone process from working correctly. And hormones pretty much govern life. Hormones in our body are the master control. And so when you mess with hormones, then your cells you're not metabolizing things well, you're not digesting things well. Like even if you just look at a simple one like sleep hormones, you miss one good night of sleep and you have the blood sugar of a pre-diabetic, you have cortisol problems, you don't deal with stress as well, you gain weight more easily, like all of these problems only from one hormone. And we're surrounded by chemicals that disrupt our hormones, including our children before puberty now are being exposed to this at a really, really high rate. And when I see statistics like how in the US, the average amount of waste is 1 trash bag per day per person, whereas in Denmark, they only make 4 bags of trash per year per person.
Wow. Holy cow.
And it makes me think of how much room we have for improvement here. So those little things like just buying a concentrate and mixing things in a glass spray bottle that gets reused versus just constant packaging that gets thrown in a landfill or in the recycling bin. Over half of the world's plastic has been created since the year 2000. And a lot of that is in the United States. And most of it, only 20% gets recycled. So most of it is not. Most of it's being thrown in the ocean. And we're seeing changes in reptiles and amphibians and ocean life. And like I said, even in Antarctica. So I think this is a big problem we need to address pretty emphatically and urgently. And I think for our own part, we can all start making changes at home with things like that, making our own products or using containers in the kitchen like glass or metal versus plastic all the time. And just saying no to things like driving through drive-thrus and getting drinks with plastic straws and plastic cups. If you're going to do that, at least bring your own cup. Or better yet, just cook at home and use whole food ingredients and reusable bags and reusable containers and really reduce that waste like they've done so well in Europe in many places.
And what about skincare products? For example, I think we've all been marketed as women to say, hey, we need these very expensive products that you buy at, any expensive department store for anti-aging or wrinkle cream or just to be more beautiful, whatever the messaging is. Do you find, because these ingredients, these chemical ingredients or these combination of ingredients are so effective that it's better than what you could do at home? Do you believe that to be true, or do you think the more, natural choices are just as effective?
I think the natural choices can actually be more effective, but I think we also have to consider the internal aspect because just like the body is designed to move toward health, it's also not designed to age prematurely. And if we're starting to see signs of aging that we think we need to cover up, that can actually be a sign of maybe we don't have enough collagen, or maybe we're not getting enough micronutrients from a variety of vegetables in our diet, or maybe we're just not getting enough sleep or vitamin D or whatever it may be. So I feel like rather than trying to just put a Band-Aid on it, these are actually great things that we can use as an insight into our health. And from there, you can support the body from the outside in and the inside out, both with natural products that are essentially food for the body, and also internally with the right balance of foods for you that will nourish your skin from the inside out. And so, again, it goes back to that chronic exposure. And just the most skincare products are actually not as effective as the natural ones. Plus, you're just having that constant low level exposure, and it's going into your bloodstream through your skin, because our skin is our largest organ. And so anything we put on our skin does enter the body. And I feel like this is an area where women get the short end of the stick. Whereas there's all those jokes about men and how they have like one personal care product, which is a bar of soap, and they wash their hair with it and they're done. And we have like 25 different things, including like cream specifically for our elbow or our toenails or whatever. When really we can do the same thing as the guys. A natural soap can be used as a cleanser and as a soap and even a shampoo. And then a few natural ingredients can become a moisturizer that actually feeds the skin, because things like shea butter or beneficial oils like argan oil are closer to our body's natural balance of pH and oil, that they can be absorbed more easily through the skin and support the cell versus just trying to cover up a problem with the cell.
And you made a great point earlier too, that why not this natural beauty? That, we just, with natural products, natural beauty, and let our natural selves show through. And what about things like makeup?
Yeah, so there's tons of natural options for this one as well. And to your previous point, I think it's also taking a step back and saying, when did aging become a bad thing? When did we decide that it was bad to actually look the age we are? And it used to be that the elderly were revered in a society and that their wrinkles were a sign of wisdom. And people didn't want to get rid of that because it was a sign of all the joys and the laughter in your life, and also the tears and the sorrow in your life. It's part of your story. And now it's like we're trying to maintain the face of a 20-year-old throughout our entire life. And we're willing to sacrifice our health in the long run to do that. When, like you said, like we can just let our natural beauty shine through at the age that we are and embrace that and support the body in a way that like lets our true beauty show versus having to always have artificial things covering us up.
Right, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much for all that. And again, everybody listening, everyone we talk to, you can go to Wellness Mama, and she's got a solution, a recipe for every one of these that's a natural replacement. So these are, obviously, we've talked food, we've talked products. What about this thing called stress? Because we're, so many women and moms and working moms and breadwinners and business owners and entrepreneurs, and we're trying to do all this at the same time. And I just see that so many of my listeners are just completely overwhelmed. As you know, my day job's on money, so they're so overwhelmed on this financial side. But the financial stress so much comes from just this life stress and everything is just so stressful. And it's like, I have no more space. Like, how can I not go through the drive-through? How can I do some of these things? I'm already maxed out. But without even understanding that maybe the stress is one of these biggest factors that's a contributing factor to this cascade of not necessarily disease, but even just feeling low energy and feeling like we have to take some shortcuts.
Absolutely, 100%. And aging prematurely, all of that, so many things tie back to stress and how it impacts our hormones. And this is an area I'm going to be writing quite a bit about in the upcoming months, because I'm really passionate about this. So I can say, first of all, I get it. I have been at that place where I've been so stressed and just almost to the verge of a nervous breakdown, actually, at one point. And I feel like part of the root of that is there's been so many amazing things that have happened for women, and we now are able to be in the workplace and to change the world. And we have so many opportunities, but also I feel like we still have all the same obligations that women have always had throughout history. So yeah, we're now being able to be the breadwinners and to be like you and I both are, like affecting the world in a positive way, but we're still the ones who are having to manage the kids and the meal plan and the laundry and the schedules. And even if we're hopefully grateful and happy to have a partner who helps with that, like I know many people do, I feel like the emotional responsibility still tends to fall on shoulders of the mom or the woman, just because we tend to think that way. We tend to be the nurturers, and that's the way our brain works. Even if we don't have physical children, like women's brains just tend to nurture and manage, and that's our default. And so I realized for myself and in my own life that I didn't want to go through my children's childhood with me being stressed out and exhausted and not present. But at the same time, like you said, we have to support our children. And I have a mission in this world that I really care deeply about. So how was I going to manage all of those things without losing my own mind? And what I ended up implementing in my life that's worked brilliantly is the idea of running my household life like I would run a business. So I was doing all these things in business that were super organized, and I had a team and they had responsibilities and we had goals and systems, and it just worked. But then I would come home and it's like, what am I going to cook for dinner? And when I need to wear clothes for the kids and school supplies and all these things just constantly rolling around in my head. And I realized, what if I had the same systems for the home? So I basically manage my house now in a little bit more loving of a way, but like a business where we have long-term goals and short-term goals. And we know what we're working toward together as a family. And then within that, like my kids have defined roles and things that they're helping with. So everything doesn't fall on me. And even the things that I do still do and manage myself, there's a time and a place for them. So there's a time when the laundry is going to happen, and a time when I'm going to make the DIY products, and a time when I'm going to work. And so when those things aren't happening, I don't have to worry about them because I've taken the emotional stress away and I know when it's going to happen. So when it's not time for laundry, I don't have to worry about when the laundry is going to get done. And they don't have to take up mental space, which has allowed me to be very much more present and very much less stressed in day-to-day life. So that's an area of passion for me right now, is just teaching women how to make the systems that make day-to-day life so much less stressful. Because I know you talk about systems too, and it can seem restraining at first, but truly there's an amazing freedom in systems because they take away the stress. And that which we plan and manage, we don't have to stress about or worry about because we know that it's going to happen. And so I think in today's world, while we have all these amazing opportunities, we just have to be a little bit more cognizant of putting these systems in place so that we don't just keep ramping up our stress and having all these, plates in the air and things that we're juggling and never managing them. Because I think we owe it to the people we have relationships with to be present, but we also owe it to ourselves to not be stressed all the time.
I love that. And so those that don't know you, or they'll shortly get to know you, you have an incredible business. You're married. How many children do you have?
I have 6.
You have 6 children. And you've got a thriving business, and it's even starting to really hockey stick. So many great things you're involved in and opportunities that are happening. And so, you're busy. So, when I heard you speak, that I thought was just so beautiful was that your kids have roles, and this is a family affair, and you're not trying to do everything for your kids and do the work and do this. There's systems, but it's family goals, and everybody does have a role, and everybody's playing a part, and it's not just everything's on your shoulders. So would you talk more about that as far as what you mean when you say run your family as a business? Like, how does that break down? How does that look like for you?
Absolutely. So we know in business, for instance, that the key players like the CEO role or the creative type, that in order for the business to grow, they should be spending the majority of their time doing the things that uniquely they're capable of doing that advance the business. So for us, that's things like podcasting and writing books and being involved. And the same thing in the home. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And so it's about plugging people into the roles where they are able to really serve the family and to feel like they're contributing, and also move toward that goal of family organization and not being stressed. So one of the guiding principles we have in our house is that I won't do anything for my children once they're capable of doing it themselves. And that's not to say I'm a cold-hearted mom who will never brush my daughter's hair just because she can do it herself. I still braid their hair sometimes, and we still have all those kind of activities. But in general, once they are capable of doing a job for themselves, I'm not going to do it for them. So once they can do their own laundry, I'm not going to do it for them. Once they can cut their own food, I'm not going to do it for them. And once they can cook their own meals, I'm not going to do it for them. And I'm really passionate about this because I feel like I've seen so many people that enter adult life without basic skill sets, and it's so stressful for them. And it's hard to have to adapt to all of the responsibilities of adult life and be learning to cook and do laundry and manage finances at the same time. So for us, it was a really big focus that our kids would develop these just simple day-to-day life skills early and be able to do them well and be able to do them within the framework of our family so that all of it wasn't falling on me. But that said, another thing I think it's important to learn from business is in business, you have to prioritize and schedule the most important things first. So if the podcast is the most important thing, I can't push that off and never schedule episodes because I have to deal with email. The most important things have to go on the schedule first. Same thing in family life. So for us in family life, some non-negotiables, the things I want to make sure that happen regularly before my children leave are things like family dinner and spending time together and doing activities together. So those things actually go on the schedule first. And family dinners are, for instance, a not negotiable in our house, even if stuff comes up. And the most important things go on the schedule first, and then everything else has to fit around that. So for me, that means because family is more important than business, the family things go on the schedule first, and then I schedule business around that. So on most days, I typically only work a couple of hours, and I try to keep that very close, that schedule very tight, because I know, first of all, that we fill whatever time period we're given. So if I gave myself 8 hours a day to work, I would find things to do for those 8 hours. Whereas if I only work for 2 hours a day, I have to be laser focused and know what I'm going to get done and get it done, because the more important things, the family time and all of that, are more important, and they already take precedent in the schedule. So I think it's about scheduling the most important things first, keeping the priorities, and then both teaching and enabling, but also requiring the people in our lives to have roles that empower them. Because it may sound harsh, I should say, like, I'm not a slave driver making my children do these things. They actually feel really empowered to have ownership for being able to do these things, and to be able, like, my 5-year-old does her own laundry because she can, and she loves it because she feels so big that she can do this. And even though they may not always love doing the dishes, they love that we're part of a family together. So those would be my two starting pieces of advice: is schedule the most important things first, and then let everyone have their own responsibility and role. And we do little things supporting that as well. Like I mentioned, family dinner, and we do things like gratitude and ask questions like, what did you fail at today? And what hard questions did you ask today? And things like that, to encourage everybody to think toward common goals and to sharpen their minds. But I think to me, that would be the advice to women and moms especially, is just make sure that the things that are actually going to matter to you when your kids leave home, hit the schedule first before the work stuff, because the work you can get done in an amazingly short amount of time if you have to.
Well, so that, I think you almost skipped right over that you work 2 hours a day, more or less. So your business is thriving. Like I said, it's growing. And so you're keeping that to 2 hours, and you homeschool your children. But I think the big takeaway there is in only 2 to maybe 3 hours a day, you're able to grow this business and participate and do strategy and build the relationships and write the blogs and write the book. And how many books do you have?
The second one comes out in December, and then the third one is in the works.
That's what I thought. So you have your weekly podcast, you're writing books, you have this blog, you're doing conversations like this, and so you're running a business in just a few hours a day. I think that's a big takeaway, because I think I think anybody, if we didn't have an example, anybody would say BS to that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's also one of the lies of modern society. Like, not only do we not need a million personal care products to be beautiful, also everything doesn't always have to be this hard. When we put the systems in place, like, life can be a lot easier and less stressful if we just simplify a little bit. And I think that lie has caused so much stress for so many of us, just feeling like we have to be everything all the time to everyone and do everything. And just, I see this in women all the time. The idea that we're only kind of the sum of what we do for others, or our achievements, or we feel the need to always help others and nurture others, which is awesome. But also we have to extend that to ourselves. I think the quote is that if your compassion doesn't extend to yourself, it's incomplete. And we have to, like, be able to kind of, that proverbial, put our own oxygen mask on before we can help others and be able to show up even better. But it requires that focus a little bit on self-care. And exactly like you said, it doesn't have to be this hard. Even managing a big business doesn't have to be this hard if we have our priorities in order and we have our systems in order. And then the freedom that allows is so worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think we add so much complexity to our lives that maybe doesn't have to be there. And that's even been part of what the messaging I've been trying to offer through my masterminds and that type of thing, is like, where can we simplify? Where can we just cut stuff out? Like, really, do we have to be doing all of this? And if we really look at it and try to dissect it or deconstruct it, it's like, oh, I really don't have to do that. And I really don't have to do this. Or I can ask for help there. I can ask for help over here, and just start looking for those places. So what about you and your husband? So what's that relationship look like? Clearly, you guys are on the same page. It sounds like you have a similar ambition and family values, and you guys are a true partnership. So that's pretty uncommon too. So how do you what's the priority of your marriage, and how do you two work together? And how do you keep that as one of the, the most important priorities?
That's been a learning curve over the years. It's been so neither of us entered the marriage as entrepreneurs, and we got married pretty young, and we have now 6 kids and 3 businesses between us. And so he has his own business that keeps him relatively busy, and that is his primary focus. But also he's involved in Wellness Mama from the tech side, so it's really fun that we get to work together. But it also has its challenges, and for anybody I know, like we've had friends who they ended up working together or they ended up working from home together, especially. And there's definitely challenges to navigate there. I think it also goes back to having the separateness and having the independence and having your own areas of expertise that you get to own, just like in a house or a business, having your own things that are yours, and also having clearly defined things what you're working together on. That way you don't feel like you're stepping on each other's toes, but you also feel like you can ask for help when you need it. And we try to have really clear lines as far as just separating business versus personal life and who gets veto power in the business where. But also we both are workaholics. So we have to guard against the fact that if we let ourselves, our hobby would become work really quickly because we both love it. But I'm super grateful in that sense that I get to work with my best friend and we get to work toward a mission together, but it does have its challenges. And I think there's so much great advice that can go toward a marriage. I think for me, the biggest one is just, and I'm not perfect at it, he will be the first to tell you, but just keeping like always willing the good of the other and keeping the other person. It's like marriage requires you to both show up 110%. There's no 50-50, and it is going to be hard some days. And so I think for us, it's like there's never a chance that we're going to opt out of this. Like we're in this for life and we know that. And even if we wanted to, we have 6 kids and 3 businesses together. So there's no logical way in which that could work. And so keeping that focus of what we have to do to nurture the relationship and to keep our marriage constantly moving forward. I truly believe in anything in life. There's no stagnation. You're either moving up or down. And so we do things like we have weekly dates and we try to exercise together, just little touch points, and even just getting away from the kids once in a while to show the kids also that our marriage is the primary part of the family unit. And that while they're the most important visitors we're ever going to have, they're technically visitors to this house because they're going to fly away one day. And we're going to hopefully gladly rejoice when they do that, although I'm sure I'll be bawling my eyes out. But the permanent part of this family is my husband and I. And so keeping that focus for us, and certainly it has its moments and it's not always easy, but when it goes back to scheduling the important things on the schedule, the marriage things rank really high.
Awesome. And when you say sometimes it can be challenging, what would be the biggest challenges? Is it this trying to navigate all these different concerns and figuring out how to land in the same place? Like who's going to do what?
Partially, yeah. And I think we're maybe a unique case as well. We're both the firstborns. We're both just on a scientific note, we both have a gene mutation called MAO-A, which they call the warrior gene. So we're both very driven and mildly OCD and tend to like to get our way all the time. So we've had to learn to navigate that. And it's the thing that I love the most about him, but also the thing that can be difficult at times is just that I love that he challenges me and pushes back. And he doesn't just go with things, like it is constantly helping me improve. And I hope that I'm doing the same for him. But we just have to also temper that with making sure that we're respectful and that we let the other person let their voice be heard and not always just push for our own way. So it's been like a sort of a dance throughout the years of learning how to do that effectively.
Absolutely. All right. So now I'd like to segue into, and this goes a lot about where I see people on my end, like what I do for my work and where they complicate their lives is in this realm called money. And that was another thing that I was just so impressed by what you talked about, because it seemed like the money thing is a really healthy part of your lives. And you've really worked to keep it simple. And I even love on your website, it says, healthy living on a budget in a way that it seems like the priorities might be in a good order there as well. So what is your philosophy, like your philosophy on money? And then you and your husband as a family?
Yeah, well, I will say I feel like I've learned so much from you on this already. I love your approach, and I hope to keep learning from you. But for us, it's been a focus of trying to create long-term wealth. That doesn't always just mean financially. That means like, what do we want our life to look like long-term? What do we want to be able to do with our children long-term, including things like we know we want our kids to at least have the opportunity to be entrepreneurs. So when they're in high school, we want to kind of nurture them and create an incubator within our homeschooling environment to help them start businesses. We'd also like to be able to financially invest in those businesses. So having finances set aside for that is important to us. So it's things like, and you explain this the best I've ever heard, but just not spending all of what comes in and trying to have like filling the most important things in first, having a focus of where that money's going to go and how you're going to use it for the long term, to not just be spending it day to day. So like I talk about running my life like a business at home, and you talk about the financial side, and that blew my mind because it makes so much sense. And we're not actually trying to like implement that the way you explain it. But we've always done that to some degree, just as far as putting money aside for investments and also for giving back to things. We love helping with charities overseas that encourage entrepreneurship or that encourage like women entrepreneurs, especially. So that's a priority for us, is to have money to be able to affect change, both in the US and overseas as well. And it was something that, since our parents were not entrepreneurs and money was really tight for both of us at different points in our childhood, it was something we talked a lot about. Once our businesses started growing and we actually had money to get past just our day-to-day expenses, was how we would use it for good in the world, but also how we would teach our children about it. Because you hear that kind of tension between, like, we are where we are because we had tough times and we had to work through them. So do you give your kids like the advantages of money now, or do you make them have to work through it? And I asked a friend of mine who's much more successful than I am this question, and he had a perfect answer in my mind, which was, he's like, if you've worked so hard in your life to get to here, why would you knock your kids back down to here, make them work to get back up? He's like, what you do is you let them start from here and you give them every advantage that you can so that hopefully they can achieve much more and help many more people. But from the moment they're born, you make sure that you say to them and really get into them that success is not about money, and that if all you have is money, you are poor, and that success is about changing the world and helping others and creating a positive ripple in the world. And then those advantages that you give them can affect that many more people, hopefully in a positive way. And I thought that was a really good answer, because obviously as parents, we can't purposely make our kids' lives hard to begin with. So it's not like we would just, knock them down, but to what degree do you support them and give them advantages? And so we do try to make it a priority to do things as a family, like travel, which we feel that enriches the kids and gives them opportunities to learn new languages. And it also is difficult, so it teaches them those hard lessons. And so that's a priority. And because of what I know about health, real food is a priority. So that's a priority item on our budget and things like that. But we don't spend a lot of money on things like clothes. Or like I don't own a single thing that's like a name brand that anyone would recognize. My kids don't either. They're climbing trees outside my window right now. So we buy a lot of stuff secondhand because they're going to destroy it anyway. And on a health note, there's less pesticides in something if it's already been worn and washed a lot. So you actually are avoiding some of that chemical exposure if you buy secondhand. Plus you're saving things from going into the landfill. So just we are willing to spend money on the things that are important to us, but we're also willing to be very harsh with budgeting and things that we don't care about. So we don't spend money on cable TV, for instance, or fancy clothes, or the things that we don't feel like enrich our lives. And I think, at least from our perspective, that's been kind of the guiding force. It's just same thing as schedule. Like, what are the biggest priorities? And those go on first, and then everything else you got.
Yeah, and that's so brilliant. And really it's something I've been called like money and meaning. And it sounds like what's meaningful in your life is a healthy lifestyle, healthy food, the fact that your kids can be outside and running around in the dirt, and that, so with those things being the priority, there's no need for label clothing. There's no need for the certain emblems on maybe the car or this or that. Again, that when we can reduce our maybe monthly budget in a way, because some of those payments or that lifestyle isn't important, it gives us that space and freedom where we're not in the grind every day because we're trying to keep up with all the payments. And it looks like you and your family are really doing that, if we make enough to be healthy, we're doing good enough. And everything on top of that just gives us more opportunity to invest more and grow more and create more. But we don't have to have more for our life to be any more rich.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what's next for you? Like, what's most important? What are you working on? What would you like to share as far as maybe a leaving message?
Yeah, well, for me, the most important thing in my life is actually the part I can't share much of, which is my family and my kids, just because I protect their privacy. So I don't post about them online much. The internet doesn't know their names or their pictures. But that's what I hope in my life will be my greatest work, is raising them. But from the business side, we are in the early stages of developing a personal care line that will solve those problems that I was talking about as far as toothpaste and some personal care products. I'm really excited about those. So hope to have those hopefully by the end of the year, but if not, early next year. And then really my message going forward is going to be about giving women the tools, not just to live naturally, but to live with less stress, like we talked about, and really empowering women to still maintain everything that they do, but just not having to feel that emotional stress burden all the time. So more of that to come on Wellness Mama.
Well, I love that. Well, let me finish up with my final question that I like to ask everyone is, what is a myth? I like to do a little myth busting. What is a myth that you come across most in your work, as you're having these conversations or just what you see happening in the world? A myth that you'd like to bust?
I would say, to narrow down, probably two things. One is that just because you can't see or smell something doesn't mean it's not impacting your body. So going back to everything we talked about is that chronic low level exposure and really educating yourself about what that's doing to the body. But even more so than that, I would say that the message to women of being, it doesn't have to be this hard. I think that there's a badge of honor when it comes to stress and busyness, and how many of us answer like, how are you, by saying busy. So the myth to me is that busy is a choice. And it's all about priorities. And I think it doesn't have to be that hard when you start with the priorities.
I totally agree with you. Well, you've been amazing. Thank you for your time. And a personal thanks, I know from everybody listening, and wellnessmama.com. And thanks. I just want to really applaud your work. Like I said, before we met, I've gone to your website countless times as a solution, and you're just impacting so many lives with your work and your mission and the way you live your life as an example. So keep doing what you're doing, girl.
Thank you so much. And I would say the exact same back to you. I love all the work that you're doing, and it was such an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. And I love our conversations.
Thank you.